Greetings from my kitchen studio in San Francisco, and welcome to BRC and Friends, a regular-ish 30-minute Google Hangout with me, Bruce Reyes-Chow, where I chat with friends and adventurers from around the interwebs. Today, I welcome to the show the pastor of Southside Presbyterian Church in Tucson, Alison Harrington. Welcome, Alison.
Thank you.
Reverend Alison Harrington became Southside Presbyterian Church's pastor in January of 2009. Bringing with her a passion for Christ and social justice. She attended the University of California at Berkeley, where she earned a bachelor's degree in peace and conflict studies with an emphasis on U.S. race relations. She's also a graduate of a fine institution, San Francisco Theological Seminary, where she was the presidential scholar and where she volunteered at San Quentin State Prison, working with the San Quentin Giants baseball team and the Protestant Chapel, leading Bible studies and teaching theology. She was a young adult volunteer with the Presbyterian Church USA to Belfast, Northern Ireland in 1996, and has traveled on peace and justice delegations to Chiapas, Colombia, and Cuba. In 2010, she was named one of Tucson's 40 under 40, and in 2011, she was awarded the Beatitudes Brave Preacher Award. She's currently a Beatitudes Society Fellow. She's currently active in areas of immigration and the growing sanctuary movement. I'm glad to have her today. She clearly doesn't do anything in her life. Before we jump in, please take a moment to check out all the links below. There's a bunch of links there with my links and Alison's links. Follow along, share the video. Feel free to tweet along with us at Reyes-Chow or at Rev_Harrington and use the hashtag at BRC and Friends. And if all things are working, you may be able to chat along with us if all the bells and whistles for the Google Hangout are working. As usual, our time is broken into 3 segments. The first will be centered on the interests and passions of my guests, the second around a current event or two, and finally, last words where I ask a few random questions. All right, so we're going to go and get started. The reason I asked Alison onto the show today was because Southside Presbyterian Church, that community under the leadership of her, that church has had this long history of being active in fighting for just immigration policies, being part of the sanctuary movement, which we'll get into later, and now with so much around immigration hitting our news and things happening around children and labor practices and laws and all this craziness, I wanted to get somebody on who is right, engaged, and who we trust and knows a lot what's going on. So really, Alison, the first question I have for you, just to kind of help lay some groundwork for us. What's currently going on with immigration, especially around the children that we used to hear about so much, we haven't heard so much, but give us kind of an update on the current status of immigration in the U.S.
Well, at least as it pertains to the kids, there has been a decrease of migration to the United States by these children, and that's largely because the Mexican government has clamped down their border. So we're seeing less children coming to and showing up at ports of entry, but we still are seeing mothers and children and kids on their own fleeing the horrific violence of places like Honduras. So what is happening is when they arrive here in the United States, they are kept in Border Patrol custody they're only supposed to be in Border Patrol custody for about 72 hours, and then they're supposed to be released to the custody of Health and Human Services, and specifically their Office of Refugee Resettlement. Because the systems have been so overwhelmed, they're spending a little bit longer time in Border Patrol custody, which is of course very concerning to us. But then they are put into more appropriate sort of situations with the Office of Refugee Resettlement. And then they're largely reunited with family throughout the United States. So people who may be watching, you may find folks cropping up in your kid's school, maybe at your own church, in your neighborhoods. You might see recently arrived migrants who are trying to figure out what does life in the United States look like. The concerning thing, of course, is that many of the protections that these folks are supposed to have underneath our own laws, there's some threats to kind of peel that away so they can be deported more quickly. So we're seeing what they're calling rocket dockets happen, where kids are being deported very quickly, and unfortunately we have seen at least the case of around, 5 kids who have been deported, murdered in Honduras. So it's very concerning to us that they are not being, that they have legal representation, and that the time that it takes to really make a case for asylum, that they're able to have this time so that they're not deported back to death.
Right. So just to kind of we are seeing images, this is maybe a month or 2 months ago, of these kind of storage facilities of children just kind of piled on top of each other, and folks I know were going and trying to check it out. Have those been if not eliminated, or at least decreased in those kind of instances because the Mexican government has clamped down, or at least is that part of the crisis over at this point?
Well, those facilities still are open in some places. We had a facility here in Nogales, Arizona, that I was able to tour. That facility has been closed because there has been a decrease. But there are other facilities that are still open, and so children are still being warehoused in the same way, with some improvements, but they're still being warehoused. I mean, I can't tell you how traumatic it was for me to tour that facility. I mean, there was at one point I was weeping in that tour to see children behind chain link fences with barbed wire at the top. To see the way in which we are treating these children was something I've never experienced in my life.
Yeah, I'm anytime, we both are parents, and mine are, I mean, a little older than yours, but every time I kind of was seeing those, and my kids are some more deeply empathetic than others, but at least these are kids of your age. I was listening to I listened to right-wing kind of conservative radio talk and watched some news just to kind of make sure that my bubble isn't the only bubble I think exists in the world. And one of the things that folks were saying was like, well, these kids are just learning the system. They're like figuring out what to say to get in, and this asylum thing is not really true and all of that. I mean, how do you respond to folks who are saying these kids are trying to work the system, or their adults are, or that kind of thing? How do you respond to folks who take that position?
They definitely stretch me as a Christian because it's so ridiculous. I mean, what 12-year-old wants to leave their family? What 12-year-old wants to get on the top of a train and be threatened and raped? What 12-year-old wants to go through that, to come to a country that is not going to treat them kindly? These are kids who are fleeing for their lives because they have been told that they will be killed. They have been told that they will be raped. And they've seen the rape and the murder of their friends and their family members. And so the idea that these kids are somehow working the system, and their parents are somehow working the system, it boggles my mind. And I would, I just, those folks need to stop and think about what it would be like to be in that situation of making that choice to either send for your child because you're already in the United States and you know it's too dangerous, or to send your child. The heartbreaking decision that must be, and the extreme danger that these children are in. It's just, it's moments like that you really hope will bring people to a higher, morality when it comes to children, because this immigration debate is so contentious and filled with such vitriol. You would think that with kids it would be like, yes, of course. Right. Of course, the thing that has frustrated me is that these same, well, maybe not the same people, but our United States government often threatens sanctions to other countries who do not receive refugees. Yeah. And here we are, not receiving refugees and trying to put every single roadblock we can, trying to send them back as quickly as we can. And if we were witnessing another country doing this, the president would be saying, you have to do this, otherwise we're going to pull aid or we're going to do sanctions. So it's very troubling.
The U.S. with a double standard, I'm shocked, really. I just can't believe it.
I know, it is shocking.
Breaking news on BRC and Friends. Well, how I respond is I yell at the TV, "You're a jackass," and then I try to, I try, my kids when I'm so vocal when I'm watching TV and I'm watching these things, and I owe a lot of money to the Cuss Cup in our house. I asked my daughter yesterday; she told me that I owed like $10, and I asked if they take credit cards because I just want to. But it's hard, right? How do you even teach this idea to not repay evil with evil, and how do you bless your enemy and not curse them in the midst of all of this, and at the same time try to debunk or speak truth to what's being put out there, which leads me to my next question is, that's one of the myths that out there, right? That these children come, they learn how to work the system, what to say, or their parents are, or whatever it is. What are some other myths in some of the work that you've been doing that you hear and you're just like, wow, I can't believe people believe that? Or even ones that like, oh, there's a subtlety to this that folks need to realize. But what are a few of those myths out there that you want to make sure you address for folks?
Mm-hmm. I think a few of them, as they relate to the crisis of the children who are arriving, is that the problem is a lax border, that our border is not enforced enough, and I don't understand that. Living in the borderlands, seeing the huge militarization of our border, and the fact that these children are being apprehended. So it's not like the kids are showing up in our community, like they're sneaking behind, but like sneaking over the border. So I don't understand that, but that's definitely a myth. Other myth is that they're coming because they think that the president is going to offer them deferred action. But there's been lots of interviews of the kids, and out of like, I don't remember what the stats were, but like out of like a huge amount, only 2 of those children knew about the deferred action for childhood arrivals, which of course would not even apply to these children who are coming. So I think those are some of the myths that, and that they're working the system, that somehow they're, the myth that things aren't as bad as they say they are in Honduras and places like that. I think the other myth that when it comes to immigration is this idea that why don't they just immigrate legally? Why don't they just get in line? Right. The reality is there is no line. Right. And so it's frustrating when people just don't see the reality of what's happening. That again, I don't remember the exact years, but basically if you're trying to bring a family member here, it's going to take you 20 years. The waits are reprehensible, and the reality is that it doesn't take into account the real push and pull factors of immigration. It doesn't take into account the real poverty and desperation that people are living in. And then I always want to ask people if they have a child, like if your child was hungry, if your child was saying to you before they went to bed, "Mom, I'm really hungry," what wouldn't you do to provide for your child? You would climb any wall. You would go through any lengths to provide for your children. And that's what so many of the folks who are coming to this country are trying to do. They're trying to provide for their family. And that's a noble thing, and that's a courageous thing, and it's not a criminal thing.
Yeah. I often, when I talk about race and immigration with folks, I tell the stories of my own family and kind of that what you do for your family. And my grandfather came under a process where the system was unjust, and so he figured out a way to get into the United States. And I'll ask the question, do you think my grandfather and my family should not be here? And it's amazing that some people will say yes. I'm like,
but
wow.
These people are not indigenous people to these lands.
Right.
I don't understand that. There's this whole dichotomy of like the immigrants who are good immigrants, which basically they're white immigrants, and the people who are bad immigrants, which means they are not white. Yeah. And I mean, I think when my great-grandfather came here from Ireland, I don't even think there was a notion of like legal or illegal immigration. You just came. Yeah. And you figured it out. So that's very frustrating because, excuse me, it's often people who, I mean, I've never heard a Native American, and my church was originally established as a Native American mission, so it's not like I don't have conversations with Native Americans. I've never heard a Native American, say that kind of thing.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Well, so you're obviously involved in a lot of the thinking about this and kind of in the leadership of it. But your church is actually again kind of being part of the sanctuary movement, and it was in the 80s, and it has been one of the beacons of that. Can you tell, for those who have never heard of it or maybe just kind of casually have, can you tell us a little bit about the sanctuary movement in general, and then what are you all doing now and what's going on currently with kind of the new movement starting up again?
So sanctuary is an ancient tradition that we have in our scriptures where cities were set aside in the Old Testament to shelter those who were convicted of crime. And so sanctuary is a tradition that has that begins there but goes throughout human history. And so in the 1980s, communities of faith clung to this idea of sanctuary when they were witnessing massive migration, again from Central America, at that time mostly El Salvador, for folks who were fleeing the civil war there. And what was happening is, I mean, it will sound like I'm talking about something happening right now.
Yeah.
They were being apprehended and they were being deported back to death squads on what became known as death planes. And when communities of faith, when people of faith recognized that this was happening, they said, we can't allow this to happen. And when they also recognized that the U.S. government was not going to adhere to their own refugee policies, they knew that they had to stand up and do something. And so what began at that time was an underground railroad where refugees were given safe passage from the border up to churches like my own church, where they were housed for a short period of time or a longer period of time. And then they started to make their way through the United States to the 500 other churches who were sanctuary churches at that time. You know, our church here in Tucson housed probably about 14,000 people during this time.
Wow.
And so it's a huge part of our legacy. That kind of iteration of sanctuary ended in about 92, 90, around there. And we hadn't done anything in terms of formal sanctuary since then, until May 7th, when we welcomed Daniel Nayoy Ruiz into sanctuary at Southside. And what has shifted and changed is that the Obama administration is a leader in deportations, as many people know. Under his administration, 2 million people have been deported. It's approximately 1,100 people a day who are being deported. And the vast majority of these people are community members, parents, tias, tios, PTA moms, Little League moms, and they're being deported and separated from their families. The Obama administration identified that their system was overloaded, and so they needed to prioritize who they wanted to deport. And so they issued a memo back in 2011 out of ICE, excuse me, saying who's low priority. And these people who are low priority should not be deported. And yet they say that on one hand, but we still see people who are, by definition, low priority being given final orders of deportation. So it's at this point that the churches started to step up and say, we're going to offer sanctuary because this is a community member that we don't want to part with. And this is a mother, this is a father who we don't want to be torn apart from their family. So Daniel entered sanctuary, first time we done sanctuary in like over 30 years. And he was here living in a very small room here at the church, because sanctuary means that you stay within the confines of the church property, with the understanding that Border Patrol and ICE have basically said that they will not go into what have been deemed sensitive areas, places like schools, places like hospitals, places like churches. So he lived here in a very small room for 28 days, and every day we prayed, every day we called, every day we wrote letters, we had press conferences, we did everything that we could, and after 28 days he was granted a stay of deportation. Then what happened, about a month later, another mother came to us, Rosa Robles Loreto, and she's the mother of 2 boys, Gerardo Jr., who is 11, and Jose Emiliano, who is 8. And she was facing a final order of deportation. And so I began to talk to other pastors in Tucson to see who was ready to offer sanctuary. At that time, nobody could act quite that quickly. And so what we did, we decided to open up Rosa's case. She entered sanctuary here at Southside on August 7th. And we opened the process up and decided that we were going to run her campaign like a Sanctuary 101 training. So we've had 10 local churches who are actively engaged in her case, so that they would be equipped and empowered and have the experience and the wisdom of what sanctuary looks like, so that that might lead them to declare sanctuary themselves. And so we have a church who will be who's ready and who will be declaring sanctuary tomorrow for another man here in Tucson. So another man, Francisco, who has 5 children, all U.S. citizens, has a final order of deportation, and so he will also be entering into sanctuary. So it's a very difficult time, because it's a time of a lot of broken promises. The president at the beginning of the summer said he was going to do everything within his power to alleviate the situation of many people facing deportation orders, and then a couple weeks ago he said that he was going to wait until it was more political. Well, he said that he needed to wait till after the elections. I don't know if he used the word what's politically expedient, but that was basically why he was making that decision, with so many close races going on. So he leaves. I don't know how many people are going to be, deported in that time until he waits till the time is right. But in the midst of these broken promises, congregations all over the nation are saying, you know what? We have promises that we've made promises too. We've made the promise to love our neighbor, to welcome the stranger, and to work for justice. And we are going to be faithful to those promises, and we're not going to break that promise. And so we see congregations. I think right now we're at 25 congregations that are ready to offer sanctuary, and every day that number is growing. And so it's an exciting time of solidarity and of impassioned action on behalf of the undocumented community.
Great. Thank you. That was wonderful. I think this is, I hope folks watch that segment just alone and just kind of get, because I think you give a really good overview of what's going on. And then I love the fact that it's a challenge for other churches to engage, but not just go out and do it, but you're figuring out how to use really your rich legacy and what you're doing and what you have done to kind of empower some others. So really appreciate all the work you're doing in your leadership, but also like the community of the Southside. So thank you for all of that. For those of us that aren't kind of right there, I know there's immigration stuff that impacts almost every community. When I travel the United States, I'm in some random place and they're dealing with immigration issues. But what do you say to folks who are not real active right now, but they hear it, they're kind of, and I don't want to say lukewarm as a derogatory, but they're just like, what do we do? Like, I see this, my kids' friends see this stuff, church people see it. What are some of the things that you could say, okay, here's what would be really helpful, whether it's give money, like I don't mind at all asking people to give money to causes. Is it write letters? Is it, what would you say are a few things that folks can just do today?
Well, I think congregations need to begin what is often a very long process of discernment. We need to figure out as Christians, as people of faith, what is our call within this particular historical context. I'm very aware that those conversations often take years, and that's okay, because I'm very afraid that what is going to happen with these kids who are arriving is that, maybe they won't start deporting them right away, but maybe 2 years down the road, maybe 3 years down the road, we might see rapid deportations happening of children back to very dangerous situations. And so churches need to get ready for 3 years from now. So people need to begin to pray and to consider what our response should be as congregations. And then, right now, there are sanctuary congregations that are popping up everywhere, from Portland to the Bay Area to LA to Chicago, Philadelphia, New York. I mean, everywhere they're popping up. But every church, well, I would love it if every church was a sanctuary, but I understand that that's not feasible or practical for every church. But as a pastor of a church that's offering sanctuary, there is a massive amount of assistance that needs to happen. Because here's the thing. Sanctuary is not just about finding refuge and shelter within the four walls of a congregation or of a house of worship. It's about finding shelter within a community that is engaged, empowered, and organized to fight for that person to stay in their community. So it can never be one congregation alone. It has to be a coalition of other congregations who are willing to make calls to the White House or Department of Homeland Security, who are willing to come and pray. We have prayer vigils here every single day. We need other pastors to come and lead that, so it's not just me hauling my 2 kids down every single day for prayer vigils. So there's financial, there's financial help that's needed, because when someone enters into sanctuary, sometimes they're the sole provider for their family, and during sanctuary, I tell those who are in sanctuary, when we do give them a donation to help their family, they're always very uncomfortable about that because they already feel like they're receiving so much. But they are doing an amazing work for the community. It may not be that they're doing their normal job that they would be doing in the community, but they're speaking with media. They're being a voice for thousands of people who are not able to speak. And that's an amazing work, and that work needs to be supported so that they are able to provide for their families. So, people need to just consider, what their role is in all of this. And, I can't tell you what a joy this work is. it's hard. It's hard to see Rosa with her 2 boys and to see them at times break down crying because today is day 49 that she's been in sanctuary. But a couple weekends ago, we had a dance at the church because in the midst of struggle, we need to always celebrate what we can celebrate. And to see Gerardo Jr., 11 years old, and his mother dance was the most amazing thing. And to be joyful and to just delight in one another's company. I mean, that's what Sanctuary is about. Sanctuary is about making sure moms and sons get to dance together. And so to be able to participate in that work is the joy of my life. And, I mean, it really is the reason I became a pastor.
Great. Thank you. It is so evident. I really, really appreciate that. I'm getting all weepy on this side because I saw those pictures of them dancing. So it's been great to kind of follow along with all of that. All right, there's no good transition into the second part of the show, really, coming off of all that, because But one of the things is that you are not just immigration pastor, like you are a full person and different interests and everything. So we had 2 topics that we want to talk about really quickly. So when I do a prep with all of the guests and kind of said, here, what's the second things you want to talk about? You said something about zombies. Now I don't know what's up with the whole zombie thing that's going on in the world, but what's your take on zombies? Just go ahead. What do you think about them?
I mean, I'm terrified. I mean, everyone I think should be terrified of the zombie apocalypse. I mean, this is the thing we should be really fearful about. And I'm panicked, really. I'm a transplant to Arizona, and so I used to live in the Bay Area. And when I lived in the Bay Area, my father, who's also a Presbyterian pastor, also is he's NOLS certified. He's an outdoors guy. He does search and rescue. He's like ski patrol. So in his garage, he has everything that you could possibly need for an apocalyptic situation. And so I always thought to myself, well, I'm within an hour driving of everything that I would need for a zombie apocalypse, but I don't have those sorts of I don't have resources here, so I'm terrified. Aren't you?
It's interesting. I am not a big zombie person. I think maybe I was more of a vampire person. I don't know. That's interesting. But though my daughter played a zombie in a movie, she got to be where the zombie kid was like this scarlet letter, and everything you did wrong in the world, if you did something wrong in the world, you had this third world zombie child following you. And so it was a mark. And so you would walk into a cafe, you knew who was good and bad, and there was a whole thing around trying to get rid of your zombie. Can you ever make yourself whole and all this kind of stuff. It's a fascinating thing. But no, my kids are big time zombie people. I don't understand.
I mean, if they're like Walking Dead zombies, I think I'd be okay because the Walking Dead zombies move very slowly. So you can figure out what to do. But if they're like
shoot them in the head, right?
Yeah, you shoot them in the head, or you can cut their heads off. This is fascinating. But the World War Z zombies move very quickly. Yes. But when I think about zombie apocalypse, especially when I used to watch The Walking Dead when I actually had time. But what's terrifying, actually, this is kind of deep, maybe, is not the zombies, but what fear of zombies do to people. And the way in which people lose their humanity in the situation, and the way in which they just, it is like John Calvin, total depravity, run rampant.
Like Lord of the Flies, and my take whenever I watch these kind of shows, and I watched the first three seasons or something, and then kind of lost interest as I usually do. But I was like, where's the chaplain? Like, who's playing the chaplain role in this situation? Have you seen the movie Warm Bodies?
No.
Oh, so you should check that out. That's a great zombie movie, and whether a zombie can come back to life. There you go. It's actually good. Anyway, so we're actually already at the end of our half hour, which is really kind of amazing. And so we get to end on zombie talk, which is great. But as I do with every guest, I ask a few random questions, and you can feel free to expand or not. You can I had one person. I asked a question, and they just said one word, and we just left it there, even though I wanted more, but it was fine. So here's your first question. A smell that reminds you of your childhood.
A smell that reminds me of my childhood. That's hard. There's a sound that reminds me of my childhood.
Sure, go with sound.
The sound of walking on rocks.
Okay.
But also the beach, because I grew up on the beach. So like the smell of the ocean and like the sound of walking on rocks.
Yep.
Around my grandparents' beach house. Yeah.
I can smell and hear it. All right, a TV show from your childhood that you hope makes a comeback.
Oh man. Oh gosh. Fame. I used to love Fame.
Oh, you know they tried to do a reboot of Fame and it wasn't very good.
Right.
But maybe there will be another one. All right, your first or your worst job?
My first and my worst job. I've had great jobs. I used to be a bartender, but my first job was I worked in a movie theater, and I actually became a projectionist. So the reels of movies would come in, and I would throw it together, and I was the projectionist. So I destroyed thousands of dollars worth of film, but that's okay. It was a fun because I got to watch every movie. So
That's awesome.
that was a great first job.
So we have something. I bartended my way through seminary. FYI.
Me too.
What? Did you bartend at Chevy's?
No, I bartended at clubs in Oakland.
So that would have been too weird, but that's so funny. The
Yeah.
coolest pastors bartend their way through seminary, apparently.
Yes, they do.
All right, so here's your fourth question. Who will be cast in the upcoming blockbuster movie, The Alison Harrington Story?
Jennifer Lawrence.
Ah, there you go.
I love Jennifer Lawrence, and especially because my voice is a little scratchy today.
You do. You have your J-Law voice on. Yeah. All right. So last question, paying it forward a bit. One organization that you hope more people know about.
Groundswellmovement.org is one that I really want to plug, and people can go on to groundswellmovement.org and learn more about the unaccompanied children crisis and can sign petitions calling for different legal protections. They can also go on groundswellmovement.org and find out about how to support the sanctuary cases that are happening. So they're an amazing group of interfaith leaders who are trying to be a groundswell of progressive leaders calling for justice in our nation.
Great, thank you. I will make sure to include all the links from everything you mentioned. I'll get all those and make sure those include in the recap, and especially for Groundswell Movement. All right, so thanks for tuning in to this episode of BRC and Friends. Thanks again to Alison for hanging out today. Glad to have you. Please take a moment to subscribe to the YouTube channel. There's going to be a box like right there that's going to show up there in a minute. Click on that and you subscribe to the channel. Share this episode with your friends if you want a good kind of 101 what's going on right now with immigration and sanctuary. This is a great episode to watch for folks, and be sure to connect with both of us via all the links that we have below on Twitter and Facebook and all those crazy social media places. So until next time on BRC and Friends, please keep talking, because there are times when silence is not an option. We'll see you next time.